Very shortly we're going to be talking about what happens when you discover that your young child has a very, very, very rare form of liver cancer, and then you lose that little boy, aged 4 years old. That's what happened to a young boy called Joel, and in his memory his parents created a charity which has raised a phenomenal amount of money and also quite possibly saved the best part of 30,000 lives. Leigh Renak will be telling me all after this. Across the three counties, we seem to ooze generosity when it comes to supporting local charities and helping others. Leigh and Lisa Renak from Elstree lost their son Joel to a very rare form of liver cancer in 1994 when he was only 4 years old. They went on to set up the Jolie Bear Appeal in his memory, and over the last 20 years they've helped save quite possibly up to 30,000 lives, having raised pretty well £250,000 as well in the process. Leigh, he would have been 24.
He would be 24, 25 now. He'd be coming up for his 25th birthday in next week.
How do you imagine him? How do you remember him? Do you remember him as a little... I've got a 4-year-old myself. Do you remember him as a little 4-year-old? Or do you almost try and imagine what he would be like now as your young adult of a son?
I suppose we remember him very much as the Joel that was. We've got lots of pictures frozen in time of a very charming little 3-year-old, and that's the memory of him. It's very difficult to try and progress that forward, and I've always tried not to dwell on what might have been, and to try and take the positive side of things. And so having a really nice memory of a sweet smiling 3-year-old staring at me is what I've got and what we've got.
And what you hang on to. And of course, that's the brutal part of a young death, is that they remain forever frozen in time. I spoke earlier on in the programme about my best friend who was killed in a car crash, and whenever I go to his grave, he's still 18 years old, and that's 24 years later, and that's the brutal part. They are suspended in time.
Yeah, he was, when he was a 3-year-old, our little Jolie Bear. I suspect if he was a 25-year-old...
He'd still be his mother's Jolie Bear. Don't disappoint me on this. I'm interrupting you because he would always be his mother's Jolie Bear.
But that, to be fair, that was a nickname that was given to him in hospital by one of his... the care nurses who was specifically responsible for him, and it's the name that stuck with him, and it stuck with us. And so it was the natural thing that when we looked to set up a charity, that we used that name.
When did you become aware that he had a problem? Was he a very healthy 2- and 3-year-old?
He was very, very healthy until probably a week before he was diagnosed, and all of a sudden my wife had been dismissed by our local surgery as being an overwrought, over-anxious mother because her son was a little bit under the weather and a little bit under the weather. And eventually he started to show signs of jaundice. And he was quickly rushed into Barnet General, and a wonderful matron, as they were in those days, she sent him off for some results, and they came back and said he's a little bit jaundiced. And she said, I'm not happy with those results. And on a hunch, she sent him to get scanned. And the words, the rest is history, sort of come to mind at that point.
Albeit that it was a very rare form of liver cancer, so was it easy to diagnose at the time, or was there a period when they said, OK, there is this but?
There is this growth. It is clearly likely to be a cancerous growth. You are now rushed to Great Ormond Street, and we had then other tests at Great Ormond Street. And then the final diagnosis is surgery, or was in those days. Things are very, very different now. But in those days it was...
Much more targeted now, aren't they?
You could go in now with keyhole surgery and do what was done in a major 4 or 5 hour operation, which was purely, in that time, to find out what his problem was. Going back 20 years, the advances that have been made are phenomenal in that period.
In terms of the timeline, from the moment when he was diagnosed, rushed to Great Ormond Street, how long did he live after that?
Exactly 365 days. We had the formal diagnosis in Great Ormond Street of his problem on the 4th of November, and it's ironic. Well, it was troubling because I disturbed my brother on his wife's birthday on the 4th of November and disturbed him exactly 365 days later on her next birthday.
Were you aware from early on that it was life-limiting, or did they feel that they could stem the cancer?
We were aware that we were fighting a very, very difficult fight. We knew that there had been 8 cases worldwide, I think it was, of reported cases of his tumour in his position.
For rare, that's rare.
Yeah, for rare, that was rare. It's not a uniqueness I've actually ever wanted to have. And we were aware that all 8 had not survived, and they were all in children. So we knew from early on that we were in trouble. The problem was the last roll of the dice, if you want to call it that. It's a terrible way to put it, but was to have quite major surgery, and unfortunately the surgery was not as successful as it could have been, and his liver was destroyed pretty well in that surgery, and he lived for a few weeks afterwards.
Prior to that operation, was he aware? Did he know how? I mean, I'm thinking of my little Matilda. She's bright as a button. You know, she spots if I'm even in like a 5% bad mood, let alone if there's something serious going on. How aware was Joel
Of before the diagnosis?
How seriously unwell he was?
Oh, I think once he was unwell and in hospital, the hospital became his life. You can't not be unaware, because you're walking around and you're seeing in Great Ormond Street, in those places, you're seeing kids walking around just dragging drips around and showing all the typical clinical signs of chemotherapy.
I guess what I mean is at that age, can they be aware of how serious it is?
I don't think they're aware of how serious it is, but I think they are aware at that stage of how ill they feel. But he rarely ever complained about it. It was only that the biggest complaints we ever had were that his mouth was sore, because that was a side effect from the treatment.
From the chemo, yeah. I've said this so many times on my programme before, so I'm going to use the same line as I always do, but it is unimaginable to lose a child. We say that no parent should have to bury their own child, and it is true. I've got 3 children under 7. I can't even start to get my head around it, Leigh.
No, and it's something I hope you never have to get your head around. And to be honest, it's something, you're right. Nobody, the stock phrase is nobody should bury their children, it's all too often, unfortunately, that people do. And nowadays, success rates are much, much better. Thankfully, for clinical advances, success rates are so much improved.
As is often the case, funerals are there for a reason. Religious rituals are there for a reason. They have a certain. They can have a fairly cathartic effect. And you started to think differently from the moment that you had the funeral. You realised that you could do something in his memory, didn't you?
We realised early on that 2 things would happen. Very typically. And in my view, unfortunately, when there's a Jewish funeral, there's normally lots and lots of adverts in the in memoriam columns in the Jewish newspapers, and we didn't want people spending their money on that. We wanted to do something.
It's not cheap. I can speak from some experience.
and so I phoned the papers and said that it was our wishes that they did not accept any endorsements, any obituaries whatsoever, other than one simple one that we placed.
From you and your wife, yeah.
And in addition to that, because because a child was involved, we had a lot of people come to the funeral, and we said, look, don't waste money on that. Don't waste your money on thinking about flowers or anything like that. We will put a bucket at the back of the room. And we did. And we said, we're going to do something decent, something in memoriam as a tribute from whatever's put in the bucket. And on the way out of that, a very close friend of mine who's a solicitor said, But in addition, we need to set up something that's going to last. I'll set up a charity.
Create a more formalised... Yeah.
He offered to do it, and within days, possibly a couple of weeks, we had a charity set up called the Jolie Bear Appeal. And within 2, 3, 4 weeks probably, we had £25,000 in the kitty. And it was a very, very short time afterwards. And we could do an immediate project at King's College Hospital in South London, which is a liver specialist hospital. And we spent £25,000 there.
Astonishing to have reached that level so quickly. As I've said on there before, I am a Jew, but I'm a totally atheist Jew. But the one thing I will always recognise is the rituals, particularly around death and funerals, do have a very comforting feel to them. And of course, it's when a community pulls together, and that community is what triggered this charity being set up, and you able to fund that £25,000 first project. But there was more. There was an awful lot more, and we'll find out what it was after the news headlines. 20 years at the charity, the Jolie Bear Appeal has been running now, and they have made an awfully big difference to a lot of people, a lot of young children. Leigh will continue his story, as I say, after the news headlines. It's BBC Three Counties Radio. I'll get some travel for you after Chris Montez. It's Let's Dance.
Hey baby, won't you take a chance? Say that you'll let me have this dance. Listen. We'll do the twist, the stomp, the mashed potato too. Any old dance that you wanna do, but listen.
This is Nick Coffer
on BBC Three Counties Radio.
And we'll continue to hear Leigh Renak's story. Leigh talking about his baby boy Joel, who very tragically died aged 4 years old from an extremely rare form of cancer. At the time, there were only 8 other reported cases in the world. As I say, he died aged 4 years old. They raised £1,500 at his funeral, and within a few weeks had raised £25,000. Since then, it's got up to £250,000. Leigh Renak's in the studio talking about the charity that I think has become, pretty well a life work, an obsessive labour of love, called the Jolie Bear Charity, which was set up after his 4-year-old son Joel, or Jolie Bear as he became known at the hospital, died aged 4 years old from a very, very, I think we can add a third very onto that rare form of liver cancer. We'll talk about the charity. We'll talk about the event you've got coming up this weekend as well that you want us all to go along to and donate blood at. We'd got as far as the £25,000 that you'd suddenly raised within a couple of weeks after Jolie's death, and you were able to fund a project at King's College. Do you then have a moment where you all sit down and think, OK, we've got a big thing here, what do we do with it?
Well, we'd had a little bit of a let's say a parallel course that also set us thinking, which was the issue of blood donation, that got us thinking earlier, because all the time Joel had been ill, people always come to you and say, what can I do? I've got to be able to do something to help. And in reality, the only things they could do were possibly help out with lifts to and from hospitals. And we always used to say, because at that time there was always a shortage of blood, go and give blood at your local clinic. Just give blood, because Joel's always short of blood. And at Joel's funeral, we said to people, please just go from here. The funeral was in Edgware, and we said, please go from here to the local clinic at Deansbrook Road, which is attached to Edgware General Hospital, or Edgware Community Hospital as it is now. Yeah. And walk in and say, Jolie Bear sent you. And then a few days later, I went in and I said, Jolie Bear sent me. And the lady said, look, we've had loads of people. We've had possibly hundreds of people through the door saying the same thing. What's the story?
Who is Jolie Bear?
Yeah. What is the story about?
And funny she should ask you.
Yeah. And she did choose the right person to ask. And I explained, and then the consultant who led that clinic came down to meet me. And her reaction, once we talked it through with her, was to say, look, you pick a place, lay on the place that you want, and we will do a one-off memorial commemorative blood donor session in Joel's memory, and that'll be a tribute to him. And that happened in February 1995, and 20 years later, we're still doing one-off sessions 3 times a year around the local community.
As you say, there is that parallel process there. On the one hand, raising the money, and on the other hand, donating blood. How much blood, at an estimated level, do you think you've had donated in those 20 years in terms of litres?
I'd have to. I feel like Tony Hancock. It's more than an armful.
Yeah.
We know that we went through at the last session our 10,000th donation.
Okay.
And it's approximately a pint. So I suppose 5,000 litres approximately of blood. But the 30,000 number you mentioned before comes because every single blood donation goes 3 different directions. So it will create 3 treatments out of that, some of which are just pure blood, some of which are very, very specialist treatments that might be, for instance, ethnically based. So they want, for a lot of our donors are Jewish, from the local Jewish community, and that loads the ethnic base. And it's nothing to do with racism or anything like this. There are certain treatments that are required, the most well-known of which is bone marrow donation, which come specifically from your ethnic background.
Really?
And so if you are a minority in this country, those treatments are much more difficult to get, and they're much more difficult to be successful because there are much fewer people on the registers.
And this is why this message not only goes out to the people coming to your event, but it goes out to people of the Afro-Caribbean community. All of our of our minority communities should be giving blood, because their blood pool, that's probably a really unfortunate term, but their blood pool is smaller. And yet, as you rightly say, that there are, of course, diseases, there are conditions, many of which are very, very specific to particular communities that don't exist in other communities. They can't treat them if they don't have the blood.
Absolutely. And that sums it up perfectly. And the biggest drive from the what's now NHS Blood and Transplant, used to be the National Blood Service, the biggest drive from them is minority ethnic communities. And that's where what we've done has been so important, is that we've put probably 1,500 new donors on mostly from the Jewish community, so mostly from the minority community. And we've moved the percentage. The staggering percentage, Nick, is that less than 5% of the adults who are of an age that they can give and are healthy and able to give, less than 5%, less than 1 in 20 of them actually gives blood.
I'm surprised it's that much, by the way. I when you think about it, I don't know that many people that give blood. So, in a way, 1 in 20 sounds better than I would have feared. You need it to be much, much more, though.
We need it within the minority communities to be 1 in 4, 1 in 5. And we're talking only about those who are able to give. We're excluding from that population those who have either conditions or who have had treatment, or those who have received blood in the past who can't give. All of those people, if you exclude all of those, it's still 1 in 20. It's terrible.
As well as the blood, the 200 or so thousand pounds you've raised, you've touched a number of different hospitals, haven't you?
We specifically set out to almost travel around the hospitals that had treated Joel, which was King's College, Great Ormond Street, Barnet General and Watford General. Those were the 4 hospitals involved in his treatment, and they're the 4 that have benefited from our donations.
Wonder what's in it for you and your wife to carry on this labour of love. When you created charity, as you and Lisa did, you created charity and it becomes an absolute labour of love. It becomes a way of life. But there's going to come a point when you say, OK, we've done what we need to do. 20 years on, you look like you're not ready to stop.
20 years on, I'm still going in. We have, as I've mentioned to you, we have a blood donor session on Sunday coming up. And I'm going to walk into that session on Sunday and see 17-year-olds coming into that session eager to give their first pint of blood and eager to carry on what we've started. And that's the kick that we need. That's the
next generation.
Yeah, it's almost like a drug.
Your event on Sunday, you don't just want Jewish people to turn up.
We want anybody and everybody to turn up.
Where's the event?
It just happens to be in a synagogue.
Okay.
But it's an open community for that day. And we want anyone and everybody to turn up in Borehamwood to make it a day where the National Blood Service, National Health Blood and Transplant are rushed off their feet. They want to be rushed off their feet. And in fact, I had an email from their marketing department yesterday saying we need to promote this session because there is an abject shortage of blood at the moment.
Wow.
And can we give specific promotion to this?
And I know that John Patullo, who's the chairman of the NHS Blood and Transfusion Service, he's very much behind what you're doing as well. So it's Sunday, it's at the synagogue in Borehamwood, which is where?
It's in Croxdale Road, Borehamwood, and the postcode for those who have sat-nav is WD6 4QD. And once you're in that road, that will take you pretty well to the gate of the Borehamwood Synagogue, which is our venue for Sunday and has been our venue for 20 years.
Now, come on, Leigh, don't let me down. I know a thing or two about Jewish hospitality. Are there going to be kichels, cakes and cups of tea?
There's going to be lots and lots of food. We have our food is very kindly sponsored or very kindly provided by one of the big Jewish delicatessens, Grudzinski's, who have supported us well for 20 years. And
they do a good bridge roll. They do a very good bridge roll.
And we make
confirm.
absolutely sure that everybody is well fed and well watered and well entertained.
This Sunday, Borehamwood, that is close to an awful lot of you. Borehamwood is easily accessible from the M1. If you happen to be in that area, pop along at any point on Sunday. And as Leigh's been saying, ethnic minorities, Jews, Afro-Caribbean, Asian, Chinese, that is where the blood is needed because that's where the blood is not coming from. More information about the Jolie Bear Appeal, www.jolie, and Jolie is Joely, joliebear.org.uk. The phone number if you want to get in touch, 0208 953 5455. What a great number. 0208, I only just noticed it, 0208 9 535455. It's very easy to remember. It's brilliant what you've done over the last 20 years. Obviously, you'd have much rather not had to do it, but raising the best part of £200,000, 30,000 10,000 transfusions going to 30,000 different people. It's an incredible achievement and one which I'm sure that you and your wife are very proud of. And I hope that lots of people come along on Sunday and allow a needle in their arm.
And that's fantastic, but one thing that I can't finish this without saying is that Lisa and I and Daniel, Adam and Rachel haven't done this on our own. We have a massive amount of support of people who have been fantastic to us for over 20 years. They have supported this appeal, they have helped us raise the money, and they stuck their arms out every 3 months and donated and got involved. We have to be eternally thankful to those people.
Judging by your phone, most of them are texting you as we speak. Leigh, it's been lovely to have you in the studio here at BBC Three Counties Radio, and I hope Sunday goes really well and you get loads and loads of blood donations.
Thank you very much.